There comes a moment, often quiet, sometimes painful, when we realize that the healing we seek is not buried in books, retreats, or distant futures. It is curled deep inside us, like a sleeping animal, waiting for us to turn and face the most primal of truths, our relationship with our mother. The mother archetype is not merely the woman who gave birth to us. It is one of the most powerful forces within the human psyche. It is embedded in myth, dream, and collective memory, appearing as the nurturing earth, the devouring goddess, the sacred feminine. When Carl Jung spoke of the archetypes, he was not referring to individual personalities, but to living symbols within the unconscious that shape how we relate to life, love, and ourselves. The mother archetype in particular is the gateway to our sense of safety, belonging, and origin. It is the first mirror in which we see ourselves reflected. From the moment we come into this world, we are not just held by our mother's arms. We are shaped by her energy, her gaze, her presence or absence. If she was warm, we learned the world could be trusted. If she was unpredictable, we learned that love could vanish in a heartbeat. If she was emotionally distant, we might have spent our lives trying to earn proximity to affection, confusing attention with connection. And here lies the deeper truth. Our early experiences with the mother figure become the template through which we interpret the world. Every relationship, every crisis, every internal conflict is in some way a reenactment of that original. But here is where the archetypal dimension adds complexity. The mother is not only a person, she is a symbol. She represents nourishment, comfort, structure, but also chaos, abandonment, and control. In dreams, she may appear as a comforting presence or a suffocating force. In life, we may rebel against her while still unconsciously trying to gain her approval through the roles we play, the partners we choose, or the standards we impose on ourselves. We may think we've outgrown her influence only to find it resurfacing in our adult lives with startling force. Echoes of her voice in our inner critic, or her fears woven into our decisions. This is why understanding the archetypal nature of the mother is essential to healing. It allows us to separate the personal from the symbolic, to discern where our mother ends and where the mother, capital M, lives within us. It invites us to ask not only, who was she, but what does she represent within me? Is she the voice that tells me I must be perfect to be loved? Is she the longing I chase in unavailable people? Is she the safety I deny myself, believing I must always be strong? Until we become conscious of the archetype, we remain bound to it. We react instead of reflect, repeat instead of rewrite. But once we see that our mother is not the whole story, only the beginning, we begin to reclaim the authorship of our lives. We stop looking for the perfect mother outside ourselves, and we begin the sacred task of becoming that source of love, presence, and wholeness within. The wound beneath the image of our mother is not always visible. It hides behind the birthday photos, the fond recollections, the carefully constructed stories we tell ourselves and others. This image of the devoted caregiver, the selfless nurturer, the woman who tried her best, often becomes a protective illusion. And yet healing does not happen in illusion. Healing demands truth. Not the kind of truth that seeks blame or villainy, but the kind that dares to feel what was once unfelt, to name what was once unspeakable. There is often a stark divide between who our mother appeared to be and how she made us feel. The mind may say, she was always there, but the body remembers the tension in the air, the unmet gaze, the emotional absence. We may recall her sacrifices, and yet carry a deep ache from not being seen as we were. The wound is not always about overt harm. It is often about the subtle, consistent ways our needs were unmet. The feeling of being too much or not enough. The silence that grew louder than any scream. This inner conflict between what we believe we're supposed to feel about our mother and what we actually feel creates a split within the psyche. We repress the pain to maintain the ideal. We suppress anger because it feels like betrayal. We numb grief because it seems disloyal. But the cost of this suppression is high. What we do not acknowledge festers in the dark. It becomes anxiety, depression, relational dysfunction. It leaks out in our parenting, our partnerships, our self-talk. Carl Jung understood this well. He wrote that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. We repress the suffering of the child to preserve the image of the parent. But what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in our dreams, in our projections, in the moments we feel triggered without knowing why. It waits until we are ready to see the wound beneath the image. To truly begin the healing journey, we must allow the image of our mother to fracture, not as an act of destruction, but as an act of liberation. Only then can we stop defending her at the cost of ourselves. Only then can we hold both her humanity and our hurt in the same breath. Only then can we make space for the real mother, not the perfect one, but the one who was both capable and flawed, present and absent, loving and afraid. This is where healing begins, not in fantasy, but in courageous clarity. When we let the image crack, the light can finally reach the wound. And with light comes the possibility of transformation. Projection is one of the most potent forces in the human psyche, and when it comes to the mother, its power can be all-consuming. Carl Jung taught us that what we do not make conscious, we project onto others. Nowhere is this more evident than in our relationship with the maternal figure. When we have not fully met or integrated the complexities of our feelings toward our mother, both the adoration and the resentment, the longing and the disappointment, we unconsciously cast those unresolved emotions onto the people around us. The mother becomes a shadow that moves with us, not just as a memory but as a filter through which we see the world. This projection doesn't only distort how we see our mother in the present, it also profoundly impacts how we relate to ourselves and others. A person who grew up with a mother who withheld affection may find themselves drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, unconsciously hoping to earn the love they never received. Another may find themselves enraged by women in positions of authority, not realizing that it is not these women they are reacting to, but the buried frustration they still carry toward the one who made them feel small, unseen, or unsafe. Even, self-sabotage can be a form of projection. The voice in your head that says you're too much or you'll never be enough may not be your voice at all. It may be the internalized echo of how your mother treated you, or how she treated herself. In this way, projection becomes the vehicle through which the past replays itself in the present. We think we are reacting to life as it is, but we are often reacting to life as it was. The mother, when not consciously understood, becomes a mirror in which we only ever see fragments of ourselves. We live out scripts we didn't write, tied to expectations and wounds that were never truly ours to carry. And the deeper tragedy is that we often don't realize it. We walk through life believing we are choosing freely, when in fact, we are being led by an invisible hand, our own unconscious. Healing begins when we begin to recall those projections and ask, is this truly mine? It requires the bravery to step outside the roles we've been cast in, dutiful daughter, endless caregiver, rebel, perfectionist, and into the raw, uncertain territory of our own truth. We must gather our projections like scattered shards of a mirror and look at them closely, not to judge them but to see what they reveal about what remains unloved within us. In doing so, we begin to reclaim our vision. We stop seeing others through the lens of old wounds and start seeing them, and ourselves, with greater clarity. We stop waiting for the mother we never had to finally show up in someone else. We stop punishing ourselves for what was never our fault. The work of withdrawing projection is difficult, but it is sacred. It is the path toward becoming who we truly are, free from the ghost of someone else's story. And in that freedom, we begin to write a new one. The illusion of blame and the trap of idealization are two sides of the same psychic coin, and both bind us to the past in ways we often do not realize. When we are wounded by our mother, whether through absence, over-control, emotional coldness, or any number of subtle abandonments, we seek to make sense of that pain. The child within us, desperate for love and safety, looks for a narrative to explain why things felt broken. Often, this narrative falls into extremes. Either we make our mother into the villain of our story, blaming her for all that went wrong in our lives, or we idealize her completely, denying our pain in order to preserve a comforting image. Blame can feel like power at first. It gives us a target, a direction for our hurt, and the illusion of clarity. But it also traps us in the past. When we focus solely on what our mother did or didn't do, we externalize our healing. We wait for her to change, to apologize, to become someone new. We give her continued authority over our sense of self, long after childhood has passed. It is a subtle way of keeping the inner child frozen in time, still hoping the story will end differently. On the other hand, idealization, though it may appear noble or loving, can be just as damaging. When we turn our mother into a sacred figure who can do no wrong, we silence our own truth. We push aside our unmet needs and internalize shame for having felt them in the first place. We say things like, "She did the best she could," not as a statement of empathy, but as a shield against the grief that still lives inside us. We confuse loyalty with silence, but buried beneath that silence is often a well of unexpressed sorrow, resentment, and confusion, which can manifest as anxiety, depression, or chronic self-doubt. Carl Jung understood that healing does not come from staying in the polarity of blame or idealization, but from transcending it. It is only when we hold both truths, the reality of our pain and the humanity of our mother, that transformation begins. Our mothers are not goddesses, nor are they demons. They are people, shaped by their own wounds, caught in their own unconscious patterns. They gave us what they could and withheld what they could not face within themselves. Understanding this doesn't mean denying the impact of what we lacked or endured. It means we stop expecting the impossible, that the past can be rewritten. It means we stop organizing our identity around what was missing and start cultivating what is now possible. It is the movement from unconscious reaction to conscious responsibility, not for what happened to us, but for how we choose to live in its aftermath. True healing lies in this middle space, this sacred ambiguity, where love and pain coexist. It requires us to release the fantasy that our healing depends on someone else's redemption and to reclaim our power as the authors of our own becoming. Only then can we meet ourselves and our mothers with a compassion that liberates rather than confines. To heal the mother wound is not merely to feel better. It is to remember who we were before the wound. It is to strip away the layers of performance, perfectionism, people-pleasing, or rebellion that we adopted to survive, and finally meet the raw, luminous truth of our being. The mother wound is not just about our relationship with our mother. It is about the parts of ourselves we exiled in order to be loved by her. It is about the creativity we silenced, the needs we minimized, the voice we swallowed, the instincts we questioned, all in the pursuit of approval, safety, or belonging. Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self, as the central task of life. But we cannot individuate if we are still trying to be who our mother needed us to be. We cannot become whole while still living in reaction to, or rebellion against, her expectations. Whether we mimic her or resist her, we are still defined by her. Healing the mother wound, then, is not about changing her. It is about reclaiming ourselves from the unconscious contracts we made in her presence, those unspoken agreements that said, "I will abandon myself if only you will love me." This reclamation is not sudden. It unfolds in layers. It happens when we give ourselves permission to want what we want, to feel what we feel, to create what longs to be created through us. It happens when we stop measuring our worth through her eyes and begin seeing ourselves through the eyes of our own soul. Often it begins in silence, in the quiet recognition of how deeply we've adapted and how far we've drifted from our essence. The grief that arises in this process can be immense, not just for what we did not receive, but for who we might have been if we had been fully supported in becoming ourselves. But in that grief is also tremendous power, because the self we are mourning is not gone. It is waiting beneath the masks and adaptations, waiting in the forgotten passions, the repressed truths, the dreams we left behind. As we begin to reparent ourselves, with tenderness, honesty, and unwavering presence, we birth something sacred. Not a new persona, but a truer self. Not a perfected being, but a liberated one. And with this liberation comes a deeper form of love, one that is no longer rooted in need or dependency, but in mutual respect, in clarity, in authenticity. Healing. The mother wound does not mean we stop loving our mothers. It means we stop abandoning ourselves to do so. It means we build a bridge, not to the past, but to the self we are becoming. A self who no longer waits for permission, who no longer trades truth for harmony, who no longer fears her own power. This is the path of awakening, and on this path, every step toward wholeness is a step away from inherited pain and toward profound inner freedom. The inner child is not just a metaphor or a therapeutic concept. It is a living, breathing presence within the psyche, a sacred fragment of our original self that carries our innocence, wonder, fear, and unmet needs. When the mother wound remains unhealed, this inner child often becomes exiled, hidden beneath layers of stoicism, self-sufficiency, or even chronic busyness. We grow up, we take on responsibilities, we become competent and capable, but somewhere, within us, that younger self still waits, still watches, still aches. This child is not immature. It is the essence of our vulnerability, the key to our creativity, spontaneity, and capacity for deep emotional connection. Carl Jung believed that one cannot reach individuation, the full realization of the self, without reconciling with the inner child. For it is in the child that the unconscious holds its treasures and its traumas. And when the child has been wounded by a mother who could not attune, who criticized, abandoned, or engulfed, that pain becomes woven into the very fabric of our identity. We learn to distrust our instincts. We become hypervigilant to others' moods. We shrink our voices or inflate them, depending on what we believed would keep us safe. But most tragically, we learn to see our own needs as burdens, our emotions as liabilities. Reconnecting with the inner child is not an intellectual exercise. It is an act of profound courage and compassion. It requires us to enter the very spaces we once fled, to feel the loneliness we buried, to hear the cries we silenced. It is to sit with the child who still believes it was her fault, who still wonders if she was too much or not enough. And instead of offering solutions or spiritual platitudes, we offer presence. We say, "I see you, I hear you, and I will not leave you again." In this reparenting process, we begin to give ourselves what we once sought in vain from others. We learn to become the mother we never had, one who listens without judgment, who holds space for fear and joy alike, who does not shame us for needing love. This is not about rejecting our biological mother, but about filling in the emotional gaps she could not reach. It is about completing a circuit that was left open, finding home not in her embrace but in our own. And as we tend to the inner child, something miraculous begins to happen. The adult self and the child self no longer operate in isolation or opposition. They begin to integrate. Our choices become more aligned with our true desires. Our boundaries become expressions of self-respect rather than reactions of fear. Our relationships become rooted not in dependency, but in genuine intimacy. The inner child is not a weakness. It is the soul's wellspring. And until we return to that well, we will forever thirst for a love we believe is outside of us. But the truth is, it has always been waiting within, in the small, brave heart of the child who never stopped hoping we would come back for her. The emotional inheritance we carry from our mothers is not always spoken aloud. It is passed in gestures, in silences, in the way she looked at herself in the mirror or held her breath around her own desires. We absorb not just what she said, but what she didn't say. Not just how she treated us, but how she treated herself. As children, we are like tuning forks to the emotional frequencies of those who raise us, especially our mothers, who often serve as our first mirror of what it means to be a woman, to be loved, to be human. If our mother suppressed her anger, to keep the peace, we may inherit a fear of conflict. If she dimmed her light to make others comfortable, we may grow up afraid to shine. If she lived with chronic guilt, anxiety, or resentment, we may find those same emotional patterns playing out in our own lives, even if we vowed we would be different. This is the subtle, invisible nature of emotional inheritance. It isn't taught through instruction, but through repetition. It seeps into us through proximity, through love that was often well-intentioned but unconscious. Carl Jung often spoke of the importance of bringing the unconscious into consciousness. For, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is exactly what happens when we carry unexamined emotional inheritances from our mothers. We find ourselves living lives shaped not by choice, but by programming. We repeat the same relationship dynamics, carry the same shame, fall into the same emotional loops, not because we are weak, but because we are loyal. We are loyal to our lineage, to the suffering of the women who came before us. We carry their burdens as a form of love. But real love, conscious love, asks us to do something braver. It asks us to examine what we've inherited and decide, with intention, what we will carry forward and what we will lay down. It asks us to become alchemists of our emotional lineage, transforming pain into wisdom, silence into voice, fear into courage. This is not betrayal. This is evolution. It is a sacred act of honoring our mothers not by repeating their patterns but by healing them. To do this, we must listen with new ears, not just to our mother's words, but to the emotional currents beneath them. We must feel what they couldn't feel, grieve what they suppressed, speak what they feared to name. We must hold our own hearts with the tenderness they may have never known how to offer themselves. In this way, we begin to unravel the tightly wound threads of inherited suffering. We create space for new patterns, of presence, of authenticity, of freedom. And in doing so, we not only liberate ourselves, we liberate the women who came before us. We become the turning point in the lineage, the one who chooses to feel, to heal, and to live differently. That is the quiet revolution of becoming conscious. Forgiveness, in the context of the mother wound, is perhaps one of the most misunderstood and yet deeply transformative acts of inner work. It is not the same as forgetting, excusing, or minimizing what happened. It is not about condoning pain or erasing boundaries. Rather, forgiveness in its most authentic form is the process of untangling our hearts from the grip of resentment and unmet expectations so we can finally breathe freely, so we can finally live. When we have been hurt, when our needs have gone unmet, our voices unheard, our spirits wounded by the very person meant to nurture us, our natural response is often to hold tightly to that pain. It becomes a form of justice, a symbolic protection. If I let this go, it means it didn't matter. But as Carl Jung taught, what we resist persists. That pain, untransformed, becomes a lens through which we see the world. It limits our capacity to trust, to feel joy, to risk vulnerability. It keeps us tethered to an earlier version of ourselves, a version that remains in a perpetual search for what never arrived. Forgiveness is not something we grant to our mothers as a favor. It is something we grant to ourselves as liberation. It is the slow, courageous decision to release the grip of the past not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered so much. Because our lives are too sacred, our souls too vast to be eternally defined by another's limitations. Forgiveness becomes a reclamation of our energy, our wholeness, and our right to live untethered. This process may begin with rage, with grief, with years of unspoken truths finally coming to the surface. And that is necessary. Forgiveness that bypasses feeling is hollow. It is only when we have fully honored our pain that we are able to release it, not because we are forced to, but because we are ready, because we no longer wish to carry it, because we have come to understand that our mother, like all of us, was shaped by her own story, her own wounds, her own inherited pain. To forgive is not to absolve her of accountability. It is to release ourselves from entanglement. It is to stop waiting for an apology that may never come. It is to stop bargaining with the past. It is to take full ownership of our healing and say, though you could not meet me in the way I needed, I will meet myself now. I will not pass this wound on. I will not let it define my worth, my voice, my joy. Forgiveness does not mean the relationship must be restored. Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it cannot. But either way, the healing lives within you. And when you arrive at that place, through tears, through truth, through time, you discover something astonishing. The wound that once felt like a prison becomes a doorway, not to the life you once imagined, but to the one you are finally free to create. Reclaiming your voice after enduring the subtle and often invisible effects of the mother wound is a sacred act of remembrance. It is not simply about speaking louder, or more frequently. It is about returning to the root of your truth and allowing it to rise without shame. For many of us, the earliest silencing happened not through overt censorship, but through emotional disapproval, conditional love, or the quiet, unconscious messages that said, "Don't be too much, don't make waves, don't express what might upset the balance." And so, without even realizing it, we learned to contort ourselves, to speak in ways that ensured belonging rather than authenticity. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we repress or deny in order to maintain acceptance in our social groups, especially in the family. For many, the voice, especially a woman's voice, has been relegated to the shadow. Not just our spoken words, but our creative voice, our intuitive voice, our erotic voice, our boundary-setting voice. Each time we silenced ourselves to protect a fragile bond or avoided conflict to maintain peace, we fed this shadow. And the more we denied it, the more distant we grew from our own essence. But the voice never disappears. It waits. It waits in the tightness in your throat when you want to say no but smile instead. It waits in the heaviness that follows every moment you betray your own truth to keep the peace. It waits in the dreams you keep postponing, the words you've never written, the anger you've never dared to express. Your voice is not lost, it is buried. And healing means excavating it with care, with devotion, and with the fierce compassion of someone reclaiming what was sacred all along. To reclaim your voice is to reclaim your autonomy, your direction, your energetic sovereignty. It may begin quietly, with journaling, with tears, with uncomfortable truths spoken in private. But over time, it becomes a song, a howl, a declaration. You begin to say what you mean. You begin to express your desires without apology. You no longer contort yourself to fit into spaces that cannot hold your truth. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to rewrite your internal dialogue. Because the mother wound often doesn't just silence us outwardly, it becomes an inner critic that mimics her tone, her fears, her judgments. Healing requires us to interrupt that inner monologue and replace it with something more loving, more honest, more aligned. We learn to speak to ourselves in the voice we always long to hear, a voice that says, "You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to speak, even if your voice trembles." In reclaiming your voice, you reclaim your story. You become the author rather than the echo. You become someone who no longer waits for permission to be whole. And in doing so, you not only liberate yourself, you become a mirror for others. You become a reminder that truth-telling is holy, that authenticity is healing, and that every time a woman reclaims her voice, a piece of the world becomes more honest, more alive, and more free. Healing the mother wound is not a linear path, nor is it a destination we arrive at once and for all. It is an ongoing journey, a lifelong dialogue between our past and present selves, between the child who once needed comfort and the adult who now offers it. Carl Jung often reminded us that the psyche is a dynamic system, ever evolving, ever deepening, and so too is the work of healing. It is a process of continuous peeling back layers, of revisiting old wounds with new eyes, of integrating shadows that once felt unbearable. What makes this journey so profound is that it is not only about repair but transformation. The wound that once threatened to fracture us can become the very crucible through which our deepest strengths are forged. It challenges us to cultivate radical self-compassion, to learn patience with our own messiness, and to embrace paradox, the simultaneous holding of pain and possibility. Healing the mother wound requires us to surrender old identities built on suffering and to step into a fuller, more expansive sense of self. Yet this process cannot be rushed or forced. It asks for gentleness. an invitation to listen deeply to the rhythms of our own healing, to honor our limits as much as our breakthroughs. Sometimes, healing looks like taking a step forward. Other times, it looks like falling back into grief or confusion. Both are necessary. Both are sacred. Each moment of awareness, no matter how small, is a seed planted in the fertile soil of our becoming. And as we journey, we discover that healing the mother wound does not mean erasing our mother from the story. Instead, it means rewriting our relationship with her from a place of empowered choice. It means recognizing that she too was a child once, wrestling with her own shadows and wounds. It means releasing resentment not to excuse pain but to reclaim freedom. It means acknowledging the complexity of love, its capacity to hurt and to heal. Ultimately, healing the mother wound is a reclaiming of the feminine within ourselves, a reclaiming of nurturing intuition, creativity, and emotional depth that may have been fractured or denied. It is a call to honor not just the mother who raised us, but the mother archetype that lives within us all, the source of life, transformation, and resilience. This journey is the work of a lifetime, but it is also the gift of a lifetime. It invites us to become whole in ways we never imagined possible, to stand firmly in our truth and to offer a new legacy, not one of inherited pain, but one of conscious love. And in doing so, we not only heal ourselves, but we heal the lineage of women who came before us and paved the way for those who will come after. It is an act of courage, of grace, and ultimately of profound liberation. As we stand at the threshold of understanding, we come to see that healing the wounds left by our mothers is not simply a personal endeavor. It is a transformative act that echoes through generations. It is the courageous facing of shadows, the tender embracing of our inner child, and the fierce reclaiming of our own voice. It is a journey that demands honesty, patience, and above all, compassion, not only for the mother who shaped us, but for the self we have yet to fully meet. In the spirit of Jungian insight, we realize that within the depths of our pain lies the potential for profound growth, that the very wounds which once threatened to shatter us can become the gateways to wholeness. This path is neither easy nor linear, but it is the path to freedom, a freedom that liberates us from unconscious patterns and invites us to live with authenticity and purpose. Let us then commit to this sacred work with courage and grace, to look within, to speak our truths, and to honor the complex tapestry of love and pain that has brought us here. For it is only when we heal ourselves that we can truly transform our relationships, our communities, and the legacy we leave behind. May each of us carry this understanding forward, not as a burden but as a blessing, a call to awaken, to heal, and to live more deeply and fully than ever before.